My name is Ben Bykowski. I am Director of Technology for the Hyland Digital Ecosystem. Hyland is an enterprise software vendor. We make software for empowering teams to go paperless, to automate their business processes, to be more efficient and effective in working with their business systems. Our team's responsibility to the business is to support essentially the business users that are in sales, marketing, customer success, services, and tech support. Okay. So, and what that means is, that they work in a lot of the systems that generate the business data and the customer data that we orchestrate and maintain in Snowflake. Okay. Or in our cloud data warehouse. We're relatively new to the cloud data space and some of the modern tech stuff, at least in terms of like our responsibilities in this area. Mm-hmm. And Hyland as a whole has been, undergoing a digital transformation in the data space. We selected Snowflake last year as a cloud data warehouse, and at around the same time we selected Segment as our customer data platform. Okay. With the intention of essentially connecting the various sources where data is being generated through analytics on the websites and portals with Segment capturing sort of that interactive activity, and with Snowflake being like a destination for the cloud data. We also have like a bunch of in marketing, for example, there's a bunch of digital marketing initiatives where they launch paid media campaigns and whatnot. We use ABM in specifically 6 Sense to kind of prioritize target accounts that are in the TAM for ideal customer profile, fit and intent and everything. And because of that, the activities that marketing undertakes, it has a measurement component that we need to accommodate. So if you are doing Google Ads or display, through 6 Sense or any of those, then you want to be able to say, okay, well, what's our reach? What's our, how many impressions are we getting with our ads? Are we targeting the right audiences? And what indication do we have that that's working? And paid search, they all have their sort of unique metrics that need to be defined. But trying to bring all that data together, it necessitates the need to bring the data from these external systems onto the platform. So in some cases, like using a tool for replication, brings that into Snowflake. But ultimately, we want to tie all that back to our customer, and our customer could be considered, the account. It could be considered, a lot of people think of it as just an individual, but it's not really, it's really the account. And so from that standpoint, and from the standpoint of ABM, being able to unify that data becomes a very important thing. And what we've seen, happen over the last, whatever you might say, 8 to 10 years, probably last 5 years for sure, is that as these platforms and systems that we manage have increased in number and in capability, a best of breed approach really is good, because you can say, okay, this tool is very specifically designed to help the lead qual team, or help the tech support team, or help the customer success team, or whatever it is. But they all have a shared need around customer data. So if you want to know, or if you're managing some aspect of helping your customer succeed, whether that's by succeeding becoming a customer of ours, or succeed at being a customer already, then there's a common, we have a common aim, that's you get alignment across sales, marketing, customer success. That's a good thing, right? Mm-hmm. And we really look at Syncari as being that catalyst for the record unification around these important, things that have to do with customers. For us, Syncari provides that mechanism for if you start with the idea that you want to unify your records as sort of like, this is a thing that we want to do, then Syncari allows us to plan for that and make it possible, not just in the, hey, we're, getting new data through the activities that are taking place through, these various teams and departments, but when acquisitions occur as well. And that was our first use case was Alfresco came in, they have Marketo, we have Pardot, they both have Salesforce. How do we keep things running while we do the hard work of, rebranding ourselves or whatever, or folding them into the Hyland brand? Syncari really provided a bridge to where we could keep things running, but sync the lead generation aspect of what's taking place on alfresco.com into our CRM, which is where our lead qual team operates. What we want to do for our customers is we want to provide them with a consistent experience. We want them to feel that when they're interacting with us, that despite the fact that, both in, what their place in the journey is today and what it's going to be, let's say in 6 months, that they don't feel like they've made a big shift and they're now in a completely different part of Hyland. We want them to feel like this is familiar territory. So we leverage Okta as our identity access management that powers Hyland ID. That, we're working on a synapse to sync the roles and claims that are administered in disparate platforms and then centralize them to the Okta profile for that user. That way, we don't have to build bespoke one-off integrations with each authentication provider to say, well, what can you do here and versus what you can do there? And that becomes more of a globally recognized thing on just your account. Because in the future, we will add other platforms for customers to interact with. And when that occurs, we need to have something that scales, that can say, okay, well, now we've added a sales enablement platform, and now partners need to get some of the content that we deploy out there, and we need to provision their access to that content in the platform, but then sync it back to their one single sign-on they use to access all of the ecosystem. We looked at native integrations, which wasn't an option in our case. We looked at custom integrations, and we looked at some ETL tools, and there's the ETL tools like SnapLogic, some of these others. They, again, like technically you could probably get some of this done, but we wanted something that was more robust and resilient.
Okay. And when you say robust, what does that mean to you?
A lot of times we need to make decisions about what to do with data coming into the system before sending it back out. And that's the robustness that you get with Syncari. You don't really, again, like without that contextual awareness of what did this data look like before it came in? what does the data look like to where it's going? And being able to make decisions in the moment that is, I think, key, part of again, that we could anticipate that without knowing the specifics, we knew that there were going to be nuanced challenges like that we were going to have to account for in doing our initial systems integration for the acquisition related activities.
Got it. And what about resilience? What does resiliency mean for you?
Yeah, like so. This is especially true of like say custom solutions. If you're deploying a custom solution, you either need to have something that schedules that system to connect and send or receive data, and the schedules can get broken. In other cases, a pipeline that's built in a certain way could break based on a change in a source or a destination. I think what to do about like if a system goes offline and then comes back, like if you don't have the ability to accrue the changes and kind of hold them until the system's back and ready, that those are all things that from a resilience standpoint are important. Otherwise you risk data loss. With the custom synapse capability that is a newer feature of Syncari, that was a kind of a big deal for us because as a Python developer, most systems that we connect to have an API, and working with an API and working with Python and pandas data frames and things like that is a very straightforward thing. Now, the issue with doing that one-off thing is that you have to orchestrate your Python scripts. You have to have Airflow or some other thing. But with Syncari and a custom synapse, we can build this conceptual idea of keeping data in sync, even for things where there isn't a connector. It does require that you have to have that skill set, but I think it's an important extensible feature, I guess, of Syncari, that you can use this to adapt to systems that maybe aren't as like common, or that there isn't a connector for.
What has been most valuable in these coffee chats for the consumers anyways, is actually seeing Syncari in action. So just want to spend some time exploring.
So this is just a sandbox environment where we were working on this. And I want to say it's this one. I'm going to check this. Yes. Okay. So basically, what we needed to do is we needed to be able to have the leads that came in through Marketo.
Mm-hmm.
We needed to make sure that we weren't creating duplicate leads in Salesforce. And because it could be that a lead already exists that, initially starts off in Marketo, but we just didn't know it.
Yep.
And in addition to that, we want to get new leads, obviously, into the system as well. So what we did, for the purpose of keeping things, properly segmented and sequestered, is we had leads that were coming in, and we would ensure that they always were added to a campaign. If they weren't part of a specific campaign, that we would at least put them into a global campaign that was relative to Marketo. Does that make sense?
Yep, I'm tracking.
And then
go ahead.
And then second to that is we wanted to see, like, if they already existed in our CRM as a contact, that we would, recognize that and not bother creating a new record, knowing that this has already been handled downstream. And if it hadn't, then to see, like, was it already a lead in the system? So we were able to do that by building a pipeline that did lookups, both for is this a lead coming in, or is it a contact? And if no, can we just create a new lead? And a final aspect of this was the recently engaged. So there might be a large database that we're connecting to in a heritage marketing automation platform, but that doesn't mean that we want to bring all of those records over. We made the decision to only bring records over that were recently engaged. So picking a date, like after, the acquisition date of XYZ or whatever, then, if some activity takes place, then sync that in, and stuff that's dormant, that's old, just leave alone. So that was really kind of the purpose of this pipeline. And it was further, I guess, it is made further useful to us knowing that the sync could be bidirectional. So if it came in through Salesforce, it could sync out, and that we would have, but we would keep that to just leads that in this case were part of a campaign that had the Alfresco product line. I
see. And yeah, so why Syncari for this? Why not the Salesforce Marketo native sync?
Well, it's a simple question to answer. Marketo is designed to have it's got a very good native integration with Salesforce, but there are some caveats to that integration. One being that once it's been integrated with Salesforce, you can't disconnect it and connect it to a new org. And in this case, Marketo had already been integrated with the heritage instance of Salesforce. So we couldn't connect it to the Hyland instance for that reason. And so that was one reason why we did it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So yeah, this is your second Marketo instance connecting into Salesforce. Got it.
Yeah, well, actually, we have Pardot, or had Pardot. We do still right now, and we're moving to Marketo. Alfresco already had Marketo, and another acquisition also had Marketo. So it's like we had 3 Marketos here. We had to put them together. We had a HubSpot. Like we were collecting marketing automation platforms like they were like trading cards.
And how do you deal with data authority in that situation, right? Like how do you decide which Marketo, or how do you unify records across all those systems? Knowing that you may have leads and contacts that exist across multiple.
Well, that's a good question. So basically, we treat Salesforce as the de facto system of record for the most part. But what we do when it comes to the other marketing automation platforms or other systems that we would then bring in is, the standard rule is that we allow, for the most part, and this is like on a case-by-case basis, but for the most part, we'll allow data to come in if it fills in a blank value. Like if there's a record and there's no value, but we're getting some data coming in from the map, then we allow it to put that data in. And then in terms of authority, we would say like, well, if there's data already pre-existing, again, this is a general rule of thumb. It's not like, we make adjustments on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
If it's a shared field, that, meaning it exists in both the CRM and in the map, then if the CRM field exists and has a value, that's the value that is used, and it would overwrite what's in the map. General.
Do you know if you have an example of that we can walk through? Like a field level data authority?
I would say I might be able to. It might be in. Yeah. Well, actually, here's a thing. One of the important things that we had to do was we couldn't modify the underlying data schema, like the data model that exists in either Salesforce or Marketo. I mean, I guess you could, but the work that would be required, would be, pretty significant. And but instead, like if we have a shared field, like let's look at what is it? It would be lead source. Let's look at that. I'll mention this while I'm pulling it up. We stored the Salesforce ID of the record in Salesforce in Marketo, and then use that record to determine whether something coming and syncing in was a lead or a contact. And that was important because leads, while they exist initially as leads, when they're converted and a contact is created, that record needs to update so that, because Marketo only thinks of things as leads. That's it. They don't have contacts. There's no difference to them. And that's how it is in most maps. But when that conversion process takes place in Salesforce, we had to update the record to say, now track this contact record because it's been converted. Okay, so you could see here, like this is lead source coming in. And so if the lead source is blank, we would allow the lead source in, because we don't want to modify what the lead source is, because that initial lead source is an important data point for us to know, like, where did this originate from? So if it's blank, that was what we would kind of filter on, and then we would map that to an appropriate value. And this was important because while we didn't care what the lead source was syncing back out to Salesforce, if it was coming from Salesforce, because they're obviously the same values, it's a enumerated list. We did in the case of Marketo because they didn't match. But this mapping would allow us to have a data set, a reference data set that we could look up and say, well, whatever the value is coming in from Marketo, we have a corresponding value that we would then send back out to Salesforce so that Salesforce could always maintain its set, and we could keep the value of whatever it was in Marketo. Neither had to compromise, but both were able to kind of work interoperably.
Yeah, makes sense. And then do you have another, so we talked about lead unification in part. Do you have another example of record unification on a different entity?
Campaigns, I guess, would be another one.
Yeah, let's take a look at campaigns.
So in campaigns, this was, I guess, another interesting idea. we wanted to not bring every campaign in from Salesforce and over Marketo, and we didn't want to bring every program, as they are called in Marketo, over to Salesforce. So we had to determine, like, well, what would be the things that we'd want to unify and have in both systems. And so what that ended up being was, if we had a Salesforce campaign and the Salesforce campaign had the Alfresco product line in the list of products that could be possible for a campaign, then we would attach the campaign and we would let it go out to Marketo. So that's what this filter does here, is it looks for Alfresco campaigns only, and then generates the program in Marketo. In the case of coming in here, once these are attached, because the way that Syncari works, and as you know, once a record is attached, it tracks by the external ID of the system. So a program's going to have a campaign. I'm sorry, it's going to have an ID, and a campaign is going to have an ID, and those are unique to the systems themselves. So once they're connected, then we know. And then with the mapping, and here in our field map, we had a couple of different fields that were shared. So you can see that, like, program name and the Syncari field for program name, comes in, and then we've got the campaign, just the name, unifies to program name. So this is the unified field. But if it originates from Salesforce, then it gets set here and then synced out. But these are bidirectional. So theoretically, you could change the name of the campaign in Alfresco, although we didn't do that. But if you did, it would then update back the other way. But we could control that if we wanted to. We could say, oh, this just goes in one direction coming in. And that's the nice thing about Syncari, is that you can specify whether syncing to or syncing from or bidirectionally.
I was going to ask, this is yet another way where you control for data integrity, right? Making sure that only certain systems are the source of truth, the authority for various fields. So I'll say that, what am I looking for here?
Yeah, like for example, with products, the product list, we only sync that to Syncari because the only thing that we need to do is to check that for the Alfresco product is in that field.
Yep.
We're not syncing that data out to Marketo for any reason.
Okay.
Which is also a way to say that our record unification is based, like, initially on Salesforce, not on Marketo.
Yeah.
If we needed something to be in both systems, we would have to make this condition fit.
Anything else that you think might be interesting or useful to for folks who are thinking about Syncari and who have a use case like this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to realize about Syncari that I think might not get its due, and I can kind of just show, for example, this idea that we've used this in the past. This is the aha moment that most people have when they understand that this test record here has 3 external records. And you can see that the IDs are different because you got HubSpot, you've got Marketo, and you've got Salesforce. These are 3 different IDs. And this unified record here is not, there's no compromise to the external system because those IDs preserve the integrity of the data in those systems. But the other thing, and this is, again, why I think this is so important, is that schematically, any system that we connect to generates its own schema separate from the global Syncari schema. So you have the ability to look at what those data sets look like and plan the way that you would want to do your integration. But what's even better is that when we talk about the pipelines and we say, okay, we've got pipelines for keeping 2 systems in sync, we don't have to, like an ETL tool a lot of times would just say, we've got data over here, we're just going to move it over there because we need it over there. But you can't make a lot of decisions about what to do in flight in those systems because there's no relevant data to look up. Whereas in Syncari, you have all that data. It's in memory, so to speak. And that's important because you need to be able to make decisions about, like, well, depending on what's already there, what do we want to have happen downstream? And that's just not very easy to do in a lot of the systems that I've worked with in the past.
Can you give an example of that where data in flight may need to look up more complete information about a customer or lead or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, like I kind of did before about like in the lead pipeline, we would say, hey, a lead's coming in, but let's check to see if this lead already exists in the system that we're going to sync out to. But we're not hitting Salesforce and saying, hey, tell me if a lead exists. We're looking at the data in memory in Syncari to see if that already exists.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That way it doesn't have to do it. You're not absorbing API calls or anything because all of that processing is taking place within Syncari. The other I guess use case that you might have would be that, like based on, and this is again, probably another, I think, important thing that people wouldn't think of initially with a tool like Syncari is you don't have to just think about connecting, between two systems and then unifying the data. I mean, obviously that's important, but the other is if you have data in a system like Marketo, for example, in Marketo, we have, a number of fields that we use to maintain the opt-in status for new leads coming in. So there's the opt-in status, there's the opt-in source, there's the opt-in date, there's opted in, which is just a Boolean value. There's opted out status and, I'm sorry, opted out source and opted out date. Now, all of those fields are needed in order to ensure that we are compliant with the way that we conduct our marketing activities, right? So we might say, okay, we've noticed that we have some bad data in Marketo. We noticed that there's lead with its opted in date is more recent than the is older than the opted out date, but the checkbox that says opted in says opted in, and that can't be. That's a contradiction there. So we could say, okay, now if that is true, then let's update the record and ensure that opted in, the Boolean value is properly set, and then sync it back out to Marketo. And that way you don't have to, it maintains its integrity. So it's both a source and a destination at that point. And then the pipeline itself is meant to ensure the integrity of the data. With Syncari, we have more than just the ability to integrate two systems. We also have the ability to ensure that our data through unification it can reach a much higher potential in terms of its value. The more that we bring into a solution like Syncari where it's appropriate, the richer the context of what that data is for us over the long term. Our teams are empowered to make good decisions, and that's really what I think being, mature with the way you are processing and activating your data it requires you to have that level of, I guess, maturity with what you're doing. And, data silos, are designed, I think are more of an artifact of not thinking about your data holistically. And, Syncari, gives us a mechanism for not just thinking about it, but also then making it a possibility, making it something that we can actually do.
Awesome. And last question, I promise. If you were to, give advice to folks who are thinking about Syncari relative to, other solutions on the market, you already spoke a bit about, Syncari versus ETL tools. What would you share for folks in a similar role to you looking at the landscape?
Don't fall into the trap of looking at a solution and thinking that there's some superiority of a solution because it's been around longer. I think that especially when it comes to this type of technology, you have to understand that a lot of what you're dealing with older, been around longer solutions is the tech that is underlying those solutions. And, Syncari is, built on modern technology. So that makes it a lot more flexible and adaptable to, modern data stack tools that you're probably working with, but also much more capable of adapting to legacy systems as well. It's more than just the underlying tech, but over the overlying tech too, because, I think, I'm not sure exactly, but, if it's React or, a similar front end framework that's used for building the UI. I mean, that's part of what is nice about Syncari is like the UI is very, it's the usability level is very high because a lot of, you can tell a lot of care was put into, kind of thinking about like what the user interface was and did, the naming that went into a lot of it. I mean, some of that you have to learn, but it clicks and it makes sense. And I really like that, you can tell a modern app has been built with modern tech when the UI itself, looks like that. And if you look at what Salesforce did from, what they were to the Lightning overhaul, it's a big change. It's a good step in the right direction. Newer tools that are born in this, cloud native era, tend to feel and work better because of that, having come in the age of, post jQuery or whatever.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, awesome, Ben. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you as a customer, of course, and thanks for sharing all these great insights with our audience and our community. So we'll be in touch, and thank you so much.
All right, take it easy.
Bye bye.